Greetings, Christian friends. My name is Marcus Freeman, and I feel privileged to be with you today. I would like to share with you, if I may, from a subject that's titled Uprooted Love. Uprooted Love. A celebrated author named Chimamanda Adichie wrote an insightful book that's titled Notes on Grief. And in this book, she writes about her journey of coping with the loss of her parents. Her father died in June of 2020 during the pandemic. He died of kidney failure. Her aunt, her father's sister, died a month later of an aneurysm. And then she lost her mother, March of 2021. She writes in particular about how in her reaction to learning of the loss of her father, her 4-year-old daughter told her that she literally scared her. She describes, her daughter describes in mimicking her mom what it was like to watch her as she was. She writes about her daughter. She says her daughter gets down on her knees to demonstrate. Her small clenched fists are rising and falling, utterly unraveling, screaming and pounding the floor. Adichie speaks of being full of anger, having physical pain from crying, a bitter taste in her mouth, a heavy chest from her racing heart, a fear, a foreboding, she describes, of who might die next. She even struggles to find and receive words of comfort. She concludes that grief is a cruel kind of education. And the news of a loved one dying is like a vicious uprooting. He says, I'm yanked away from the world I have known since childhood, and I am resistant. Her response takes me back to when I was 19 years old. That's when my father died. I remember I stormed into his office and I was banging on the walls and fussing at God. God, why did you take him now? I still needed him. Fast forward over 40 years later, and my mom now. And it's 2019, and all of that year, my mom was in a comatose state in a hospital. And this woman who gave me life, this woman who helped to make me the man that I am today, that I hope to be, she looked at me during that year in that comatose state, and it was as though she did not know who I was. And then she died in October of that year, and it was devastating. But 1 week after my mom died, her brother's wife, her sister-in-law, she suddenly died. My mom's younger sister, my aunt, died 1 month later. While we were already reeling in our personal loss in the district that I served in November, right near Thanksgiving, literally during the holiday, a young pastor, only 45 years old, was visiting his family upstate, and while he was with them cooking and preparing for the Thanksgiving meal, he collapsed and had a cardiac arrest and could not be revived. In January of 2021, the wife of a clergy couple, she had some ongoing conditions, but she succumbed to those conditions and she passed away unexpectedly. In June of that year, a new pastor was due to begin at a church in our district, and he was so excited, so full of life and energy, and was ready to begin his ministry. He was celebrating with his family, and they were out barbecuing, and he was barbecuing, and he collapsed and never recovered. And then, in that moment, we found a pastor to replace him who was also excited to be there. So full of life, the life of any gathering he was, a beautiful man. And he served for that whole year up until July the 4th of 2021, this year, on which they had a wonderful worship service, and they had a fellowship after church, and he got in the car with his wife. They drove just a little way up the road, and they were in a car accident, which he did not survive, and which left his wife brutally injured. All this was going on. The COVID deaths were setting in and rising. The last I even checked, 650,000 souls alone in our country had been lost, to include all of the grief and hurt of all of their families. Over 4 million in our world had been lost to COVID. And recently the variants and numbers are rising, and now there are younger victims, and the hospitals are full again, and we're continuing with this pandemic, and not to mention being a society of mass shootings, and where we fear that a society of horrific storms and catastrophes, and the list goes on and on. A week prior to my recording of this message, I was listening to an interview of a firefighter who worked ground zero after 9/11. This is the 20th year anniversary of that horrific incident, and he was saying how he is not even able to get over his grief yet, because he's lost so many friends who are firefighters working with him from diseases and cancer related to the aftermath, and one most recently here 20 years later. When I look at all of the social upheaval and all of the division and all that we're going through and we have been through in this last year and more, I wonder if in some ways the entire human race is experiencing this endemic, maybe, of grief. I wouldn't be surprised at all, because the uprooting of a loss of a loved one is indeed vicious. Listening and watching a weather forecaster as he was trying to show the impact of Hurricane Ida that recently ravaged the land, and I could not help but notice in the background of the weatherman, as he was trying to explain the damage, I could not help but notice a tree that was uprooted, and its complex root systems were facing the camera, and you could see the roots where they had reached out and positioned themselves for the greatest possible impact to obtain the sustenance that they needed to support the tree, and they had positioned themselves to stabilize the tree. And all of a sudden, they were yanked up from the ground and now exposed, and the shock that tree is experiencing because of it, that is what it feels like when you lose a loved one, someone so close to you, knowing that you will never see them again. It is grief's uprooting for sure that is likely to ignite the psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. The first 4 being denial and the anger, me banging on the walls in my father's study, the bargaining, the depression, and trying to manage and rattle through all of those to try to get to the fifth stage, which is acceptance. And some even say maybe there's a sixth, which could be finding new meaning. Yes, this grief is difficult. Maybe one of the reasons it's so difficult is that I recently learned an Abundant Health Network presentation. It showed death impacting us in such a way as being a death avoidance culture. So where we have gone through improvements in modern medicine. We've increased safety protocols, and we have advances in wellness methods and methodologies and understandings, and we do everything we can to now put off death. Let's delay it a little while. Even psychologically, they were suggesting there in the presentation, we hide death in hospitals and in nursing homes. When someone dies, we cover death, and then we don't want to talk about it. And as Adichie said, we even struggle with the words that come to mind. Something also happened when my mom died that I did not expect. It caused me to grapple with my own mortality, my own human limitations in face of my own death. It just brought me back to one of the haunting experiences I had in seminary. My professor of theology, the late Dr. John Deschner, I did not remember the theologian he was talking about, but he quoted this theologian and the point he was trying to make. And the theologian had said every time he looked in the mirror, he knew he was looking at a dying man. Maybe our own death is what stares us in the face when we're facing the death of someone close to us, and on top of that, the unknown aspect of death, what we don't know about death. It's the unknown, maybe the unknown that makes it so difficult. Are our loved ones okay? Will we be okay? What will happen? It takes us to this deep existential level where we don't understand. There are some deep questions of meaning that we have. And imagine me, a young man of 19, all of a sudden facing such a horrific experience. I didn't have the tools. I did not have the resources to cope. And there are many temptations for a young man, for anyone of all ages, to numb the pain, maybe to self-medicate, numb the senses, maybe be distracted from it for a while, but not really satisfy those deep existential questions that we have about the meaning of life in the face of death. How do we get through the stages of the grieving that we're doing to get to that level of acceptance or new meaning? How can we get there? Also in the district I serve, there's a church that has now closed, and it has now become a community center. But in the front lawn of that church, there's a tree. The legend has it that years ago, a terrible storm hit this community, and it knocked this tree over. So that tree is laying there in the lawn in front of the church. And the residents at the time of the storm, they had to prioritize saving lives and securing property and everything. They couldn't get around to the tree soon enough. But by the time they finally did, they were surprised to find that this tree laying horizontal, down there on the ground, its branches had found a way to re-root in the soil that it had fallen on. And now, even though it was laying horizontally, its branches were reaching vertically up to the heavens, and it was shining and radiant and as glorious as ever. Maybe a great way to recover from an uprooting is to find fertile, rich soil for a replanting. And I believe, and we can offer today good news that fertile soil can be found in our faith. Our faith, our Christian faith gives us the resources, gives us the insight, gives us the language, gives us the revelation and understanding to fill the void that we have that comes to us in these times of loss and this search for meaning. Perhaps one reason that Psalm 90, one of the Psalms I'm referencing for this message, perhaps one reason it's used so often for funerals is because it helps mourners to embrace the eternity of God amidst the brevity of life. Oh God, you have been our dwelling place throughout the generations, the ages, and generation to generation, you are God. Yet we as mortals are brought to dust. In the morning we flourish, but in the evening we wither. So teach us to number our days is what the psalmist leaves us with, to give us something to aim for and to work on. But when it's read up against the New Testament passage, such as Paul's letter to the Corinthians in chapter 13, a new meaning begins to emerge as Paul is, where the psalmist is teaching about the eternity of God and the brevity of life. Paul seems to be teaching about the brevity of life and the eternity of love. Paul acknowledges the human condition where we see through a mirror dimly. We only know in part. We don't know it all yet. But in sum, one thing for sure, we are sure that love will never end, and the way we can embrace and reach and hold on to that sense of encouragement and love is with what abides. And that is faith, hope, and love. These three, and the greatest of these will be love. Our faith teaches us, it equips us, it teaches us about this cosmic conflict in which death is an entity that is ultimately defeated by what Christ did for us at Calvary and what God did by raising Christ from the dead. Our faith teaches that our spiritual nature is separate from our physical nature, and it gives us a new sense of understanding, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1, if the earthly house of our tabernacle, our bodies, were to be destroyed, we have a spiritual house, a spiritual existence not made with hands. This is how that French Jesuit priest, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, can observe this idea that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience occasionally. On another level, we are spiritual beings, he says, and we are having a human experience. So then Christ's death and resurrection is offered to us in a way that can give us a broader perspective of our existence and instill in us a new reason to have hope and maybe give us comfort. Arthur Adichie talked about how, she was planning her father's service and she was surprised how in the midst of that process of planning and finally in her tradition, mass and a worship. And she sat in the worship service in the church where he worshiped in his life, and how she found such great comfort going through the rituals of the faith. I can sure relate to that. At my mother's funeral, we recited the Apostles' Creed. At her funeral, we sung Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound. We sung the hymn also, Because He Lived, I Can Face Tomorrow. And in all my years as a pastor, never before did those words have more meaning than they did at that time, and then they do now, and will forever, evermore. This creates, indeed, our faith does create the perfect replanting soil also for our hope. Ancient Greek usage of hope means much more, so much more than our passive sense of an expectation for something that we would really kind of like to happen really bad. Hope, as it is used here, is an assurance anchored in a majestic future where every need or longing in this life is fulfilled and all the voids of our existence become complete. It's the joyful and confident expectation of eternity with God, which is the highest Christian hope for our loved ones and for us after death. This past Sunday, I had the privilege to worship at the church that lost the two pastors in the same year that I described earlier. And I had a particular assignment to introduce the new pastor to the church. And it was just so precious to watch how this church had moved on, and they were worshiping. They never stopped worshiping, and how they were still being a community of faith, and how they embraced their new pastor with hope and enthusiasm, and how they were just moving on with their lives and their ministry. It was amazing to watch and very inspiring. Had some of the deeper conversations afterwards, and with a couple of the members, and one of them, as we were talking, I was trying to console him about all that they had been through, and he really laid one on me. He, in the midst of our conversation, he just told me about how he had just recently lost a dear loved one to COVID-19. I immediately, my eyes welled up. I felt compassion. I wanted to console him even more. I was sad, but he wouldn't let me get sad. He said, I've tried to be sad. I've tried to grieve and all of that. But it's hard to be sad when I know where my loved one is going. This is a way that the church can help to be in ministry during what might be an endemic of grief. We can offer opportunity for those in our congregation and our community, those whom we serve, to express their feelings, express their pains, and all that they're going through. At the same time, be restored to their inner sources of strength and sources of our faith that can strengthen them in order to help them through these difficult times of grief that they are experiencing, moving on to possibly acceptance and maybe toward new meaning. Yes, now abides faith, hope, and love, these soils for replanting amidst the uprooting of grief. but the greatest of these is love. It's fascinating to read 1 John chapter 4, verse 8, where there he talks about how God is love. It all comes together for me when I think about the eternity of God and I think about the eternity of love that Paul talks about and it all merges together to affirm that, it's been hard. We've been through a lot. We in our grieving and our loss, but true love, real love is eternal because it is the very essence of who God is. But an author, Marianne Williamson, takes it to a whole nother level. She suggests that when a loved one dies, the relationship goes to another phase. She said relationships are eternal. The separation, though, is merely another chapter in the relationship. Often letting go of the old form of the relationship becomes a lesson in pure love, much deeper than any would have learned had things remained the same. That's amazing. I experienced, I believe, something like that. One evening at the dinner table, my wife and my daughters, as we were enjoying each other's company at dinner, as we always do. And I said something that caught the attention of my daughter, and she said, "Whoa, wait a minute. In this moment right here, you were being just like Nana." Nana is our affectionate name for my mom. Then it hit me. No, I won't have my mom again. I won't hear that voice the same way, consoling me and encouraging me. Or I won't have her to pour out my soul and share my pains and hurts in the same way. But our relationship is at a whole new level because now just maybe she lives in me. More than that, I'm in a place of new level of relating with my wife and my daughters. Their insights, watching them grow, watching us grow together is giving new meaning to life. Being with my sisters in our relationship is better than before. With other relatives, we're coming together now, and we're learning more about our forebears and our other generations of our family together, and it's bringing more meaning. And friends are closer and more caring, and life is different now. Not the same with mom not being here, but there's a whole new meaning to life now. Yes, there's been a vicious uprooting, but thanks be to God through Christ Jesus our Lord. It's been a glorious replanting through faith, hope, and love. These three, and the greatest of these is love that lasts an eternity. Amen.